Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article is about Fiscal Council. What is this Fiscal Council? Let's assume there is a body. This body is funded by the public money, that is from the taxation money, and this is permanent in nature. This is a non-elected members. Non-elected members means they are not politicians. They are experts when it comes to the fiscal policy. They are experts when it comes to the economics. They are experts when it comes to the public policy making. These experts will be put in a council, an agency or a body, and they will help the government in evaluating the government's fiscal plans and projections, and also give suggestions to the government of India about the key aspects of fiscal policy. So what is this Fiscal Council? It is nothing but a body which will have experts, and these experts will guide the government of India or government of any country to give their positive feedback or what should happen, that is a normative approach with respect to the fiscal policy. What was the need of the Fiscal Council? Or you can also put it as arguments in favor of Fiscal Council. Whenever you have the elections coming close by, the government of the day will come up with what is called as the populist schemes. So what are these populist schemes? The government may provide the subsidies, the government may also provide tax rebates, and the government may start exercising its power and can withdraw money from the market at the domestic level and also from the international level. Yes, the government of the day has every right to do so, but if it is in the form of populist schemes and programs, this will not serve the purpose, but these are ad hoc in nature. As a result, on a long run, it is the country on a macroeconomic perspective which is bound to suffer. Whenever we are looking at this borrowing, both on the domestic front and also international front, what we are also missing is that this will bring us to large deficits and debt in India. Ultimately, this will violate certain norms of macroeconomic sustainability, and this will also bring transparency and accountability in question. Ideally, whenever you have the government of the day will also have to comply by number of targets. We have to pay the interest payments, we also have to meet the timely settlements as well. But during the elections and normally, in order to appease its vote bank, the government of the day may shift the burden for the next government which is coming into picture, and this ultimately harms the macroeconomic sustainability as well. So what happens? The government of the day may push on the liability of repaying these debts to the government which is coming up next. We are not speaking about the political party here. We are only focusing on the government of the day. So what exactly happens? It is the country which will suffer on a longer run. So what is the advantage of this Fiscal Council? So what will the Fiscal Council do? It will give a framework to the government of India, and it will advise the government of India to stick to certain protocols, rules as provided by the Fiscal Council. The Fiscal Council is not manned by elected representatives who are bound to answer to the people, but these people are selected ones who are brilliant enough. They are selected on the basis of merit. They have seen what economics is all about, and these people give fiscal plans to the government of India. So they have to comply by it, and on a longer run, we may not suffer as well. So they are not answerable to the people. Hence, they know what is right and what is wrong, and they also tell the government, in case you are executing such a program, this can harm on the longer run, and such populist schemes and measures that you are planning to come up with will harm us in the near future. So what happens after this? This particular initiative can also be taken up by the parliament as well. The executive is answerable to the legislature in the Lok Sabha, and the parliament can also ask questions to the executive as well. So the fiscal policy as designed by this Fiscal Council, when it goes to the parliament can ultimately put the executive in question. So deliberations can be conducted, debates can be enhanced, and ultimately we are keeping the executive under check. So the whole idea being that you have a Fiscal Council which will give an advice and also tell what the governments will have to do with respect to the fiscal plan, and in case the government is deviating from its path, that which has been set by this fiscal council, this can be held accountable by the parliament as well. In fact, when you look at the Comptroller and Auditor General of India in the year 2018 on the Compliance of Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act of 2016 and 17, it clearly went on to say that the government had kept certain liabilities hidden. This means the future government, irrespective of the party that is coming, will have to face the brunt of it, and ultimately it is the country which is going to suffer. What would be the mandate of the Fiscal Council? According to the FRBM Review Committee, the Fiscal Council's mandate will include all these parameters, but kindly note, it is not only restricted to these, but the government and the parliament can enact and add more to this particular mandate. So what are the objectives of the Fiscal Council? Basically, it will be making multi-year fiscal projections, prepare the fiscal sustainability analysis, providing an independent assessment of central government's fiscal performance and compliance with these fiscal rules, recommending suitable changes to fiscal strategy to ensure consistency of annual financial statement. We have discussed this all, taking steps to improve quality of fiscal data, producing an annual fiscal strategy report which will be released publicly so the public will also know whether the government of the day is listening to the Fiscal Council. This is what can be the mandate according to the FRBM Review Committee. But we also have previous committees which had also given similar recommendations that we require the Fiscal Council to be established. So what are these committees? We have the 13th Finance Commission. The 13th Finance Commission had also recommended for the establishment of the Fiscal Council. It was also endorsed by the 14th Finance Commission, and we also have the FRBM, that is the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Review Committee, which was headed by N.K. Singh, who also recommended for the establishment of the Fiscal Council. But kindly remember, this Fiscal Council has to be independent of the Finance Ministry. In case it is appointed by the Finance Ministry, it will be ultimately controlled by the Finance Ministry, so there will be no independence and autonomy. Ultimately, what this will comply by is by the orders of the government of the day, but instead this has to be established by the parliament. It has to be an independent council such that it is established by the parliament and it is also reporting to the parliament. So only when it is reporting to the parliament, it will have all the required independence and it will have all the autonomy to function independently and give all the plans, the fiscal plans, to the government of the day. Now let's look at examples from across the countries. When you look at the International Monetary Fund, it says there are about 50 countries, both in the developed as well as in the developing country, which have already established fiscal councils which are on the similar lines with varying degrees of success. Whenever there has been such an establishment, what we actually see is a more accurate budget forecast, and at the same time all these governments stick to the fiscal rules and they also come up with advanced research as well. So some of the cases includes cases in Belgium, Chile as well as United Kingdom, where they have significantly contributed to the fiscal performance as well. So what this should do is that this particular Fiscal Council, if it is provided an independent and autonomic functions, they would be able to perform all these actions, and ultimately the government will stick to the fiscal rules and regulations, say some of the international examples. But there are some arguments which we also have to look at against the establishment of the Fiscal Council. What are these arguments that says that Fiscal Council should not be established? The government is required to submit to the parliament what is called as the Fiscal Policy Strategy Statement. What is this? This is basically provided under section 3 or 4 of the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act of 2003. So what is this statement? Basically, this will give all the strategic priorities of the government with respect to the fiscal area that relates to the taxation, expenditure, lending and investment, administered pricing, borrowings and guarantees as well. So whenever this particular statement is given to the parliament, it is the parliament which has to ask questions to the executive and also the government of the day. But another major issue is there is lack of demand from the parliament. That is the major issue. So another instrumentality such as the Fiscal Council for the supply of accountability cannot be a solution. Why? Because it is the parliament which is already being given all these parameters. It is the parliament which should ask the executive about all these parameters, but the parliament is not even questioning. So why come up with another fiscal council while we already have all the statements made with respect to the transaction, with respect to the expenditure, with respect to the borrowings and guarantees? So why have another body is the first major concern. Forcing the finance ministry to use someone else's estimate will also dilute its accountability. Why? Because when you have the fiscal council which is giving the numbers, which is giving the suggestions, in case something goes wrong, the finance ministry will ultimately blame the fiscal council. So in case the parliament has to ask the questions, it has to ask the fiscal council right now. But in the present scenario, in case something goes wrong, it can directly shoot questions to the finance ministry. Now if there is establishment of the fiscal council, what we will have is all these suggestions will be given by the fiscal council, which will have an eye by the parliament, and the parliament will not be able to question the government of today. There is already another institutional mechanism by the way of comptroller and auditor general. It is already a watchdog. It is already looking at the economies of scale. So why have another watchdog is another question asked with respect to the establishment of fiscal council. These are some of the concerns with respect to the establishment of the fiscal council. So what is the way forward? Whenever there is a market which fails, what happens? It is the government which steps in. The government starts pumping in the money, as we have currently seen in COVID-19 as well. So when there is market depreciation, the government enters and it starts funding into the market. But what if the government fails? That is where there needs to be a body of experts which will give an idea, which will give the inputs with a rational basis to the government about how it can upscale its programs, and that body is what is called as fiscal council. So going forward, this can be checked on a pilot basis, it can be checked for a year or two, and in case it does work, we can implement on a long-term strategy, is what this article all about. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says back and forth, and that is with respect to Pakistan's actions with respect to controlling the terrorist activities in Pakistan. Back in the year 2018, the Financial Action Task Force had told Pakistan that you as a country are not able to control the terrorist activities. That is why they were placed under the grey list of the Financial Action Task Force. After this, Pakistan had to bring changes, make sure that terrorist activities are not conducted in Pakistan, and if this continues, they will be downgraded into the blacklist. So what happens? The country is currently in grey list, and if it is not taking enough measures, it will fall under the bracket of blacklist. When it falls under the bracket of blacklist, there will be no economy of scales. Already, Pakistan is suffering from major economic debacle. In case there is a country which is put in blacklist, this ultimately means more economic sanctions. The loans will not be given by the IMF or the World Bank. Why? Because they may feel that these loans given by the international organizations can be diverted to the terrorist activities. So what happens? Pakistan was put under the grey list in the year 2018. It was asked that you have to control the terrorist activities, and they were given a deadline of 2019. But what happened? COVID-19 struck the global community. That is why their time has been extended, and now it is to the year 2020. So what should Pakistan do? In order to prevent itself from being downgraded from grey list to blacklist, it has to comply by the rules of the Financial Action Task Force. So what is the step taken by Pakistan? Pakistan has currently banned about 88 new terrorists in compliance with the new list released by the United Nations Security Council. Some of the terrorists as well as its outfits include Jamaat-ud-Dawa's chief Hafiz Syed, Jaish-e-Mohammed chief Masood Azhar, and underworld don Dawood Ibrahim. But kindly remember that Pakistan initially came up with the list. It also said that Dawood Ibrahim is included in the list, but after few days it also withdrew this particular list, saying that Dawood Ibrahim is not there in Pakistan. This is the hypocrisy of Pakistan, which has been a safe haven to the terrorist organizations and also to underworld dons like Dawood Ibrahim. Dawood Ibrahim is being looked out by India since 1993 for the terrorist activities in Mumbai initiated in 1993. Pakistan vacillates between conditions when it goes back to the terrorist activities as well as controlling the safe havens for these terrorist organizations. But what are we supposed to know? What are we supposed to understand with respect to the Pakistan's move? What could be the impact because of this particular move? The minute this notification is released, this will have a seizure of all the movable and immovable properties of these outfits as well as the individuals and freezing their bank accounts as well. So what would happen? The terrorist organizations would not be able to make transactions via the banking channel, and they transferring the money through the financial institutions, purchasing arms or traveling abroad cannot be taken up because of this action initiated by Pakistan. Before we understand what are the concerns and issues surrounding the moves initiated by Pakistan, we have to know about the National Counter-Terrorism Authority. What is this authority? We have the United Nations Security Council. It also has reports and it also has committees which sanctions individuals as well as organizations with respect to terrorist organizations. This is on the international level. But when it comes to the domestic level in Pakistan, what they have is the National Counter-Terrorism Authority. This authority will also have a list of banned terror groups. This authority will also have a separate list of individuals as well. So the United Nations Security Council will provide it on the international basis, but on the domestic front, on the national front, there are certain groups as well as lists which are prohibited in Pakistan, and that is maintained by the National Counter-Terrorism Authority. So what is the concerns with respect to the Pakistan's move here? When it comes to the United Nations Security Council, it had already banned number of terrorist organizations which are given a safe haven in Pakistan, but this was not taken into consideration by the National Counter-Terrorism Authority previously. Now, just because they would be downgraded to the blacklist, they have initiated the move of putting Dawood Ibrahim under this particular issue, and they have also put Jaish-e-Mohammed chief Masood Azhar into this particular list. Previously, Pakistan has also said this has been put in that particular list, but India has clearly said that Dawood Ibrahim was not part of this National Counter-Terrorism Authority and its list with respect to individuals as well as organizations. What we have to further look is, regardless of which list the Pakistan plays, Pakistan does not investigate, it does not prosecute or apprehend them. You have the international organizations which has already put some individuals. You also have the international organizations which has already barred terrorist organizations. Pakistan also has its own set of individuals and organizations. In spite of having that list as well as this list, Pakistan fails to investigate the root cause, and it still provides safe havens to all these terrorist organizations. Pakistan has at various times brought all these people out on a short-term basis. Let's take the example of Hafiz Syed, or let's take the example of Masood Azhar. These people were put into the jails. They were behind the prisons as well. But after some time, after tensions have been reduced, what they actually do is come out on a bail term as well. So when they are put into the prisons, it is only for the short time, but they are immediately released on bail, or they even walk free, scot-free in the safe haven of Pakistan. Government also lacks a seriousness when it comes to the purpose of taking actions against all these terrorist organizations, and that is the major issue according to this particular article, which is back and forth. They take a step and they also go back to that particular step, where it means they are not serious about this particular issue. So Pakistan going forward needs to show proof of its actions on the ground rather than going back and forth on the paperwork, is what this article all about. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says the challenge of catching elusive taxpayers. This article here speaks about taxation and its issues. According to the author, India does not collect enough taxes, and this is further going to depreciate in the COVID-19 era. Why? That is because of three reasons. So, what are these three reasons? One is because of lack of economic activity. Second is loss of employment opportunities. Many people have lost their jobs and they are currently into unemployment. And the third reason is because of loopholes in the system. So, all these reasons means that taxation in the present scenario will be comparatively less during the COVID-19. Since tax collection is poor, this could hamper the developmental activities. So the need of the hour is to improve the tax collections. How are we going to do it? What are the flaws in the system and approaches in the future is what this article all about. First up, let's look at some of the issue areas or concerns voiced with respect to this article. COVID-19 has reduced incomes to the government. So there is very less revenue that which is given to the government. Why? Because of no activity in the economy. And at the same time, because of COVID-19, the government also has to increase its expenditure as well. Why? That is because we as a country are a welfare state working for the people to provide economic justice as given under the constitution. The government will have to spend liberally. It has to uplift the people as well. This might ultimately lead to the fiscal deficit as well. Even if it cuts down on some expenditure, we have something called as the committed expenditure. So what is this committed expenditure? This includes the salaries, this includes the wages, this includes the pensions. This cannot be reduced. As a result, what we witness is tax collection decline, says the article. How does the government generate its revenue? That is because of the taxations. We have the direct tax, we also have the indirect tax. One of the direct taxes involves taxpayers paying the money. But of late, what we have actually witnessed is that these taxpayers have actually dropped when it comes to the year 2019 and 20. Why? Let's look into the argument. After demonetization, it was said that taxpayers have increased. Number of people paying the taxes have also increased, but this number has been reducing in the year 2019 and 20. Why? That is because of the tax rebate offered by the government to the people who have an annual taxable income between 2.5 lakhs to about 5 lakhs. So because the government came up with such a move, the rebate ensured that income earners do not actually pay the taxes, but instead they have to file the returns on a compulsory basis. This is what the article says, that tax filers have increased but taxpayers have decreased. There are two categories of well-off in the country. Who are those? One, who honestly pay the tax returns, and those who completely escape the tax net. These are the people who are not actually paying taxes on an honest basis, and that is the primary reason the government is not able to get enough taxes. In case all these people had paid taxes, the tax to GDP ratio would have increased considerably, says the author. The author further goes on to say, according to the World Inequality Report of the year 2016, the richest 10% of Indians earned about 55% of the nation's income. The question to be asked, are they paying full taxes as per the law of the land? The answer may be a simple no. Had they paid, the tax to GDP ratio could have increased considerably, says the author. When the markets were not working efficiently, the government had to pump in the money. So what they wanted to do was to actually encourage the private entrepreneurs as well as the corporate bodies to start investing in the market. So what did the government do? The government immediately started reducing the corporate tax. Ideally, this should have been done on the demand side. Money should have been given to the people of India. But instead of doing it, it supported the corporate tax by reducing it. So what is the major problem? Because there is reduction of the corporate tax, the taxation from the corporate body has again gone on less, and the government is not having enough money right now. The government of India also initiated number of steps when it comes to controlling the black money. It came up with number of moves like the demonetization, like special investigation team which was immediately appointed after the Modi government came into picture, and they also entered into tax treaty with the Mauritius government as well. All this did not help the government, and in fact the government is also suffering because of tax evasion as well. All these are the major concerns as to why the government is not able to get enough taxes and the coffers of the government is not getting filled up. So what is that we have to understand? We have to look at steps that which have been taken by the government. So what are the various steps initiated by the government? When Yashwant Sinha sir was the finance minister, he also introduced a particular scheme of paying the honest taxpayers. He wanted to encourage the honest taxpayers, so he was giving certain encourage incentives to the taxpayers. One such initiative on a similar lines is what is called as Vivad Se Vishwas scheme. So what is this Vivad? Vivad is about dispute. Vishwas is taking them into confidence. So all those people who have the legal disputes with respect to their taxation, they can go to the government of India's tax body. They can pay all their legal issues and the taxation, and they would not be penalized for the same as well. So what is this Vishwas scheme? Basically, it is about settling all the disputes without additional penalty or interest between the individuals as well as the income tax department. This is helping the honest taxpayer pay their tax amount, and ultimately they would not be penalized or they would not be imposed with a fine as well. Earlier there might have been a scenario where some discretion would have been given to the income tax officers or the taxation officers, so they might have engaged in the corruption. To bring down the corruption and the discretion given to the tax officers, the government has also set up a process of taxation with the help of information technology. So what happens now? What we will have is the faceless interaction. Different officials at different stages of taxation will help bring down the corruption, and for this they have initiated number of steps. One, there will be establishment of the assessment unit. Followed by this, there will be a verification unit. Followed by this, there will be a review unit, and ultimately we will also have the technical unit. In all these different stages, we will have different authorities. That is how the government has decided to cut down on the corruption. Earlier, you had a single officer who would use his discretion and pull out the corruption from the individuals. Now, since you have different stages and different individuals, this can also control the menace of corruption. But there are challenges as well. In case there is a person who is able to understand the software, understand the key challenges with respect to the software, then he can still enhance the corruption, says this article. When you look at the tax rate, what you actually witness is that the highest tax rate has been reduced from about 97.5% in 1971 to 30% plus surcharges in the current era. So what this means is the government has been encouraging individuals to pay more taxes, and the tax rate has been comparatively been reduced from the historical perspective. In spite of all these initiatives, there are some rich people who say that this is an unfair program, unfair mechanism initiated by the government of India. Apart from all these schemes and measures, there have been some challenges with respect to the taxation issue. So what are these issues? These are called as the administrative problems. When you look at this particular area, this will require large number of people. India is a vast country. This will also require large number of tax officers as well. Currently, when you look at the tax operations, it is understaffed. The number of people required for the entire country is comparatively less as well. Let's say there is an income tax that a person will have to pay, or this is with respect to an individual, or it can be with respect to the business as well. When it comes to the individual or the income tax, it is comparatively easy, so they would be able to understand the taxation that an individual has to pay for the government of India. But with respect to the business, it is not so easy. There is undervoicing in some scenarios, so this will require a lot of time as well. So understanding this particular process takes a lot of time, and as a result, what we require is more number of people who are engaging into all these activities, so the taxation as a whole is paid to the government of India. These are some of the challenges that is present with respect to the taxation regime. In case the government has to increase the taxation amount and has to increase the tax to the GDP ratio, all these issues will have to be reduced and they will have to be addressed, is what this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about DNA technology use and and Application Regulation Bill of the year 2019. What does this bill do? What is the intention of this bill is what we have to understand. And after this, we have to focus on some of the concerns as given by the Parliamentary Standing Committee. Before we understand what these concerns are, let's understand the significance of this bill. What is this bill? Let's say for example, there is a heinous act of murder, or let's say for example, a heinous act of rape where the body of that particular person is charred to death as it happened in Hyderabad. So in all these cases, the police officers will have to identify who is the perpetrator of the crime. In all these cases, they have to find out who is the accused. So in such a scenario, the police officers will go to that particular place. They might find the hair, they might find the saliva, they may also find some fluids in that particular crime scenario. So in all these cases, they would be able to take this evidence, keep it as a DNA, and this DNA can be checked with the future accused as well, in case they have to make sure if it is this accused who has committed the heinous act of murder, or it can be the rape as it happened in Hyderabad. When you consider the criminal matter, this is what the police would be able to do. Let's say for example, it can be other scenarios of robbery where fingerprint can be taken up, or it can be in other cases of criminal act as well. Then this is also used on the civil side as well. Let's say for example, there is one of the person who's passed away on the road. This is a natural death. This is not a murder. In such a scenario, we have to establish the person. We have to understand who that person is, for which what we require is a DNA as well as the DNA of a family. So we would be able to establish the identity of the person. And in some cases, let's say we also have to establish the father of a child. In that particular case, again, what we require is a DNA. So in civil cases as well as in the criminal cases, what we require is called as the DNA profiling. So what is this DNA profiling? This will basically make sure that the accused or the victim or any person's DNA samples are taken, and it is also kept in the DNA bank. When it is kept in the DNA data bank, this can be used by the criminal agencies and also by the civil agencies to establish whether it is that person who has committed the crime or not. To bring this into actual practice, what we require is a legislation, and that legislation is what is the DNA Technology Use and Application Regulation Bill of the year 2019. According to this bill, what it will do, it will establish the laboratories, it will provide the testing tools and mechanisms, it will provide the accreditation both at the national level and also at the regional level. Why? Because it has to establish the data DNA bank. So once this is done, this will require a body which is able to look into it and also provide all the regulatory mechanism. To make sure that there is a regulatory mechanism, what we have is the DNA Regulatory Board. This board will be headed by a secretary level officer. It will also comprise of experts in the field of biological sciences, forensic sciences, legal experts and representatives from multiple investigating as well as the police agencies. Now let's look at some of the important features as given under this particular bill. According to this bill, it permits the retention of a DNA found at the crime scene, and this particular DNA will be saved in the data bank for perpetuity if the conviction of the offender has also been overturned. So what happens in case there is a sample that is collected in the crime scene, this will be kept in the data bank and this will be for the perpetuity. The bill also provides for the DNA profiles for all the civil matters, and this can also be stored in the data banks as well. The bill also proposes to store the profiles of all those suspects, under trials, victims and their relatives for their future investigation. The article further goes on to speak about the consent for the DNA sample. What is the consent here? It is the permission required from the person to collect this DNA sample. What exactly happens? This can be bifurcated into two important segments. What are these? One, in case it is a crime and this crime is committed on the person, and if this particular crime has an imprisonment more than 7 years, or this will have a punishment, let's say with death penalty, or for life imprisonment. In such a scenario, consent of the accused is not required. But let's say if it is a person who is missing, or let's say if it is something to do with the civil dispute, consent of that person becomes important. In case it is a minor or it happens to be a disabled person, written consent of the parent or the guardian would be required. So this is what the overall objective of the bill is. This DNA technology regulation bill was ultimately passed to the Parliamentary Standing Committee. The Parliamentary Standing Committee looks into this particular issue and has raised several concerns. So what are these concerns? Once this particular profile is based in a data bank, this can be effectively used by the government of the day to understand whether that person is from a particular caste or from a particular community, and link that particular person and the community to the criminal activities. This happens to be one of the most disturbing claims given by the Standing Committee. The Standing Committee further goes on to say, if there is a crime that is committed and if this person accused is proof of these charges, then holding his particular sample of DNA is fair enough. But if it is not proved and that particular accused happens not to be convicted, he means he is free of this particular crime, such people's DNA should not be kept in the data bank, says this particular parliamentary committee. But ideally, this is not there in the original bill. It says that all DNA profiles, if it is in the crime scene, will be kept up for perpetuity. A link to this particular claim is when it is kept in perpetuity, if that particular person is not the offender, this obviously means we are violating the privacy of the person as guaranteed under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. So on one side, we will have to delete it, but we are not deleting it. So it means the privacy of a person is repeatedly getting violated. We also spoke about the consent clause as well. This is about seeking the permission of the person to take his DNA and also save it in the DNA bank as well. But when it comes to the consent, what we actually see, because of the executive forces engaged in this particular activity, consent at times can also be taken by force and without his permission as well. This is another major flaw, says the Standing Committee. Absence of the robust data protection legislation is another key area which we currently are in a lacunae state. Why? That is because when you look at the protection legislation, we do not have any data protection legislation. In case there is a violation, we would be able to go to the court of law. But in the present scenario, because of the absence of the data protection law, in case there is a violation, can we head to the judiciary? In the absence of it is some of the concerns voiced by this particular Standing Committee. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into some of the preliminary practice questions. Consider the following statements about Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Terminus. It is an example of Victorian Gothic revival architecture in India. It is an UNESCO World Heritage Site. Which of the above statements are correct? It is asking for the correct statement. So the answer to this is both. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. Kindly remember, this was formerly known as Victoria Terminus Station. It is located in Mumbai. It is an outstanding example of Victorian Gothic revival architecture in India. It is the expression of British, Italian and Indian architectural planning, which was designed by British architect F.W. Stevens, and it is also an UNESCO World Heritage Site. Kindly remember these facts because it becomes important for your preliminary examination. Now let's look into the next practice question. With reference to the Panya tribe, which of the following statements are correct? They live in the state of Andhra Pradesh. Their language belongs to the Dravidian family. Which of the statements are correct? The answer to this is 2 only. Why? Because they do not live in the state of Andhra Pradesh. Instead, they live in the state of Tamil Nadu, the area west of Nilgiris, as well as Kodagu district of Karnataka, and primarily in the state of Kerala. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. The Panya speak the Panya language, which belongs to the Dravidian family. when it comes to the economic activity. They are more engaging in the physical activities. So historically, they have been serving the landlords as the agricultural laborers. This article further makes another note of Kattunayakan communities. So who are these Kattunayakans? They are scheduled tribes in the Indian states of Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Kerala and Tamil Nadu. Kattunayakar means the king of jungle in Tamil as well as Malayalam. Their main livelihood is collecting and selling of honey. So kindly remember these key facts. Now let's look into the next practice question. Type 045 class multi-role frigates is built by which country? The answer to this is China. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. This is a Chinese multi-role frigate. This is equipped with latest surface, subsurface, anti-air weapons, combat management systems as well as sensors as well. This particular one is currently being manufactured for the Pakistani Navy. Now let's look into the next practice question. GAFA tax, a legislation which will impose taxes on largest technology firms, was initiated by which country? Is it United Kingdom, Germany, France or South Korea? The answer to this is France. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. So what does GAFA stands for? It stands for Google, Apple, Facebook and Amazon. When taxation is imposed on all these multinational companies, that is what is called as GAFA tax. Now let's look into the next practice question. Which of the following are the kharif crops? Rice, wheat, cotton, rapeseed, bajra. The answer to this is 1, 3 and 5. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. Kindly remember the kharif crops include rice, cotton, bajra, maize, jowar and tur, and rabi crops include wheat, gram, rapeseed, mustard and barley. What does this article speak about? This article currently says that there is increase of the agricultural activity. There has been economic output as well when it comes to the agricultural sector. But this has also seen drop when it comes to the individual income. As a sector, agricultural output has increased. Why? Because the monsoons has been good. But when it comes to the increase of the income, that has not been seen. That is because of the reverse migration. So massive number of people are going back to their villages and they are also working in their farms as disguised employers. As a result, what we actually see is less number of income at the individual level is what this article all about. Now let's look into the next practice question. Consider the following pairs. Tribe with the state. Limbu, is it Sikkim? Karbi, Himachal Pradesh, Dongria Kond, Odisha and Bonda, Tamil Nadu. Which of the above pairs are perfectly matched? The answer to this is 1 and 3 only. Why? Kirby belong not to the Himachal Pradesh but to Assam, and we have Bonda tribe which does not belong to Tamil Nadu. It is Odisha once again. So the answer is 1 and 3 only. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. Now let's look into the mains practice question. Fiscal Council tends to boost accuracy of fiscal projections, help in improving transparency and accountability, and aids the government to stick to fiscal rules better. Discuss. What are the various concerns voiced by the Parliamentary Standing Committee with reference to the DNA profiling? Suggest the way forward. So please write all your answers on the comment section, peer review and also come up with constructive criticism. This is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.